We're a little behind on this, but at the same time, the Batman dropped on HBO Max, which gave some of us that didn't get a chance to see it in the theater the opportunity to actually sit down and watch it and enjoy it. I'm kind of glad I didn't go to the theater for this one, mainly because it's 3 hours long, and I do enjoy the aspect of watching a blockbuster movie in my jammies. So, Corione, I don't think I've actually heard any of your thoughts on this movie yet, and so
Okay.
I am ready for you.
Okay, so I did watch this in the theater, which, let me tell you, when you buy an extra large soda and you watch it in the theater, get ready, you're in for a wild ride. It's more of a challenge at that point. That being said, I did make it all the way through it. I'm kind of good friends with the guy who owns a theater near me, so he let me, do my critique thing where I can sit there with, a pad and paper and write while I'm watching it. And this is, I think, the first time I can recall a Batman movie where Gotham itself felt like a character in the show. I will also say that this is probably the most detective Batman we have ever seen. So I did like those things about it. I really liked when Batman was being a detective. I felt that felt realistic and genuine and good. The core concept of the plot elements that they took from some of Batman's greatest comic book stories absolutely were fantastic. It had me guessing the whole time whether we were seeing the Riddler, whether we were seeing Hush, what we were actually getting to. That was fantastic. I felt the runtime was actually justified. It was long, but the movie needed time to build scenes, and you couldn't tell this story any quicker, I don't think, if you were determined to tell this story. So I did like that. I felt that some of the actors were criminally underutilized. The Penguin, criminally underutilized.
I see what you did there.
Thanks. There were some great points. There were some great characters there. I think this is the first time on screen we have seen a black Commissioner Gordon, and he was perfect in the role.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. Absolutely nailed it. I can see why they casted him, and I 100% agree with the casting. Worked out great. I felt like Andy Serkis as Alfred missed the mark for me. I just didn't buy him as Alfred. But then I've seen Alfred written that way in the comics. They're not my favorite episodes of the comics, but I can see where they took the inspiration from. I can see where Andy Serkis took his inspiration from. So I get it. I understand it. Things I didn't like though. I am a big Batmobile person. Okay. For me, the car is one of the most important parts of Batman. And I despised this car.
Ooh, those fighting words.
You know what?
Continue. I'm just interjecting my little commentary in your commentary. We'll fight about it here soon enough.
Yeah, and I get that it's personal preference, and I respect people's personal preference on that. But for me, if you're gonna take what looks like a friggin' Trans Am and throw a rocket in the back of it, that looks like something from MythBusters. It doesn't look like something from Batman. That's my feeling on it. There were a couple of lines that got very social justice-y that really pulled me out of the movie. They made me kind of stop and go, I'm in a movie theater being lectured at. I'm no longer, along for the ride on this mystery. So I feel like those were missteps personally. I get that it's modern Hollywood. You got to throw in a little bit of identity politics. You got to throw in a lot of blaming the rich white guy. But it didn't fit here well. It didn't feel organic to me. It felt quite the opposite, and it was very jarring, and it kicked me out of the movie. So those were things I wasn't particularly a fan of. I also really didn't like the Batsuit. He looks like he's got toaster elements on the sides on his gauntlets there. Like, And I also noticed that anytime he pulls out a tool, he never pulls it out of his belt. He pulls it out of his sleeve. Like, his gauntlets have, like, all the toys on them. And it started driving me crazy. I'm like, what the hell is he hiding all this stuff on his sleeve when he has a perfectly good utility belt right there and we can see it? So, my issues are more about those sort of things than about the overarching plot and the overarching concept. I feel like they definitely have built something that could go somewhere. If they do a sequel, I feel like it could work very well. I would really love to see the sequel from Commissioner Gordon's perspective, where the Batman character is the supporter to Commissioner Gordon trying to get the answers. I think that would be a very fascinating way to take it. And that would give us an opportunity to see more of this character that they've introduced us to of Gotham itself. I also think that, you want a really good example of how to do cinema well. The opening sequence where they're showing crimes going on in Gotham, and the criminals suddenly, see a shadow that they think might have moved, and suddenly go, you know what? No, it's not worth it. This is terrifying. I'm out. I'm giving up. I'm going home tonight, because that could be Batman. That was absolutely perfect. I do feel that Robert Pattinson was not... See, okay, I've got this theory that whenever they cast somebody as Batman or Bruce Wayne, they're either a really good Batman or a really good Bruce Wayne. They're not both. Robert Pattinson was a fairly acceptable Batman, despite not being as buff as previous Batmans. But he looked like he was a meth addict as Bruce Wayne. And I didn't appreciate that. He just looked too meth head and sad to be the billionaire playboy that is Bruce Wayne. So I get that they're doing it as like year 2, but year 2 in the comic books, he was the billionaire playboy Bruce Wayne. So you either have it one way or you have it the other. And like I said, I feel like that was just a misstep, but overall, I did enjoy the movie.
Yeah, I'll definitely share my thoughts in a bit, but John, why don't you go ahead and share your thoughts on the Batman?
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump off of Carry-On's dislikes, because a couple of them were actually some of the things that I liked and kind of saw as world building.
Okay.
Like you brought up the social justice warrior points that felt like they pulled you out of the world. For me, like I've gotten good at glossing over that kind of content. But when I was like watching, and I watched it twice, once and a half, because it's 3 hours. But I was watching it with my younger brother, and I was like being more analytical on it on the second one. And because he kept bringing up a lot of good points, saying about how much this one sets itself up for the second one. And I think the points you just made about Batman looking like a meth head, and like all correct. I'm not saying that those things didn't happen. I'm saying that they were actually potentially more towards the like setup for the second one, because what my brother brought up was that we got a really good Batman and a really bad Bruce Wayne, but the whole time we were seeing Batman realize the importance of Bruce Wayne in his life. Like for the longest time, like I think this one really showed Batman as like Bruce Wayne is Batman's alter ego, and a lot of the other ones, Batman is Bruce Wayne's alter ego, right? And so for once we're seeing like how Batman could be created and how somebody could literally dress up like a bat, feel like it's a good idea every night. And the like social justice warrior comments, while they were like too long and drawn out, I feel like they were more like calling out Bruce, like, hey Bruce, it's time for you to play the game too. Like, you need to get in there. You are a billionaire. You supposedly love the city. And, like, obviously nobody knows he's Batman, right? So, like, he thinks he's showing his love for the city. And now these other people are saying like, well, you're not. And there's a lot more you could do. And so this one really felt like it was defining Batman and giving us room to see, like you just said, an episode 2 that goes more from Commissioner Gordon / Bruce Wayne's perspective, like that world. Like, we know how dark and cool Batman is, and the scenes we'll get him in are going to be fun, but the scenes that this one really set up was that like he needs to work on his Bruce Wayne persona. Like, it is broken. It is a meth head looking guy. Like, you are putting too much emphasis on the bat and not enough emphasis on like spending your money efficiently. And that was like Alfred's call outs to him, was like, you are literally being kicked out of your company that you could do more in a single hour with than you could do all night. And I felt like that gave a lot of presence. It just felt like it was more second movie building rather than taking away from the actual story.
Okay, I see your points. I mean, and I think there's a valid thing there. And I think if they're going like a Talia al Ghul story for the second one, then I think everything you said there would be completely justified.
Cool.
All right, and now for my thoughts, of course. Before we get into our comparison and where we rank this Batman, I thought that as far as Batmobiles go, I liked the pony car, supercar aspect. Could it have used more flair? Could it have had a little bit more dressing up to be a proper Batmobile? Yes. For what it was, though, being a little bit of a car and spaceship guy myself, I loved it. I thought it was, I did actually like the simplistic side of it. So I think if you were going to put flair on it, you'd kind of want to be careful with how much flair. But otherwise, I thought the car itself was fine, but I could see how it, okay, it's a pony car, it's a Mustang with a jet engine slapped on it. All right, it is. I'm not gonna fight you on that because but I liked it. I liked it. It that combined with the wingsuit made me appreciate the fact that they were kind of going for even more realism than what the Nolan trilogy did. In just kind of in their own way. So I appreciated a lot of those aspects. I don't think they were entirely necessary to go that realistic. However, it was still cool to see them do that, though. To have Batman actually use a wingsuit instead of his cape. Because it was like, well, while Nolan had a pretty good explanation of how the cape works, it was still fantasy, more or less. This was like, oh yeah, he put on a wingsuit. Now, of course, he landed perfectly without a parachute. That's pushing it. And getting blown up in the face with no damage was also a bit of an oversight that they should not have done. That was a bad mistake. But those are only really the small things that I have an issue with, because the movie itself I thought was good. I definitely rank it up there high, and like I said, we'll definitely go over that. Commissioner Gordon, fantastic performance. It was literally, he just, I didn't even care that he looked a little bit differently than the Gordon we're used to, because this is one of those situations where race swapping is perfectly fine, because Jeffrey Wright captured the essence of the character. He was Gordon. I was like, yeah, that's Commissioner Gordon. There's no doubt in my mind. He fit the role perfectly. I really love those scenes. You mentioned doing more detective work. We'll get into that in a bit. I did like it, don't get me wrong, nothing bad to say there. It's just, I also really like those scenes where they were finally sitting there deducing the situation with each other, though. When they're having that back and forth off each other, I'm like, yes, okay, that is one of the kind of, that's the chemistry that the Nolan trilogy kind of missed, in my opinion. And so, to see them just interacting the way they did, deducing things and figuring stuff out, I thought that was perfect in the way that they executed it, and the scenes were acted well. So, yeah, I give this movie high praise overall. Now, the controversial stuff that you brought up. While your criticism is understandable and valid, and I get it, you go to a movie like this to watch a movie. You're not there to get a lecture on social politics. And if it is going to be a lecture on social politics, you definitely want to go about it a little bit better. And I think that's kind of what they thought they were doing. it just didn't come out right. Because if you listen to the line that she specifically says, it's not privileged white people that she's mad at. It's specifically privileged white guys that are running the town, essentially. Now, I know it seems controversial, and it is to say that, but according to Investopedia, we'll just go through a list here, and we're just looking at this analytically and logically, not trying to make a point, one way or the other. All right, top 10 richest people in the world. Elon Musk, South African, technically white. Jeff Bezos, who's probably the richest of them all, I think, still, because of Amazon.
Yep.
Bernard Arnault, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Steve Ballmer, Larry Ellison, and I don't see a picture of this person named who I'm not familiar with. Oh, Gautam Adani, supposedly from India. I'm gonna have to look into that. So that's 9 out of 10. So the way that they said it, I don't think it was meant to be a racial thing so much as it was just a simple pointing of fact. Now, could it have been said better? Could it have been executed better? Absolutely. I'm not going to fight you on that. However, I found that it wasn't, they weren't saying, oh, you know, white privilege. They weren't going that route. It was specifically saying, you know, rich, white, privileged guys. So I give them a little credit with that. They were trying to specifically focus on who the problem causers were, which typically is those people with lots of money and power that are pulling strings. But just went through it. That's all I was just doing was a analytical assessment according to Investopedia.
Yeah. And look, to be perfectly honest, we can disagree about a scene and still recognize the logical points that both of us are making. And I think that's really the best part about a stream like this, is that, you know, we can have a good discourse about this, right? And a genuine one too.
And that's what we're about here. Is we're about discussing the information, we're about having respect for our discourse, whether or not, and me personally, I don't like to get too much into the politics stuff. Mainly because I can't control anything outside my front door. So, why get worked up over it? Why lose friendships over something like that? If I lose friendships over a disagreement over something like Batman, I can sleep with that. That's fine.
Well, I mean, if we're going to have a disagreement over Batman, it should be that, like, we feel, you know, something like Bruce Wayne is more important than Batman or something crazy like that. Like, you know, or like some specific, or like, you know, one of us feels that, like, Robin
George Clooney's Batman's the best Batman.
Yeah, like, if we're going to disagree about something
Nipple
like that.
Suit or nah.
Right, exactly. You know, like, that is a reasonable argument to you know, throw up you know, flip a table over, as far as I'm concerned.
I just want one question. I want to know why George Clooney's Batman got nipples, but Batgirl didn't. That doesn't seem fair. Just saying.
Well, you know, equality, you know, should be a more important thing, I guess, right? You know, I would definitely
one of those Andy from The Office situations. George Clooney's nipples just chafed in his suit. He's the only one to complain about it.
Maybe. Personally, I would love to see a re-edit with, you know, equality of bat nipple throughout the entire movie. I think it would make for a much, much better movie, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, it. Like I said, there's certain execution with certain
in the
lines.
interest of equality, of course.
Yeah. Certain execution of lines definitely could have been better overall, but I don't think it strayed too far off the message. And like I said, I think they were trying to just point out to, oh no, it's the guys who control Gotham that are rich and just happen to be white. And that's the point I was making with my list, was like, if you look at it, some of the most powerful people, the richest people in the world, not necessarily powerful, because there is a difference, they do just happen to be white. So it's not like it was completely off base to say it in that way either. And that's the only point I was just trying to make. Was that it actually was and that's why I give him credit for it, because it was actually a thought out line. It wasn't just, my white people bad, which I agree is not a road we want to go down. We don't want to go down that with any ethnic background. We don't want to try and typecast in other people like that by making them less than. So I do agree with the cautionary tale about it. However, in this instance, it was specific, and so that's where I'm, as a writer myself, I'm saying, hey, good try. Maybe try it a little better, but I'm not offended. So, any other thoughts on Dark Knight before we argue best Batman?
Oh, or you mean the Batman, or
right,
do we want to talk about Dark?
Before we discuss the
yeah.
Dark Knight? This is what happens when I go unscripted all the time.
Fair enough. I guess the only other piece of the puzzle I would say is, I think it's quite possible that they're going to get a sequel, and if they do, if they do, I would really encourage them to, like, I know the end credits and kind of the deleted scene stuff was dealing more with the Joker. I would really encourage them to shy away from that and go in a completely different direction. Look, I think we can all agree that the best depiction of the Joker is, has so far that we've seen in movies. We've gotten some really, really good ones. We've gotten some really poor ones too. But I think staying away from that, at least for now, maybe have him still in Arkham building up a crew for like a big capstone movie at the end of when you decide to end the arc would be a better fit for him. What I would recommend is take it in the direction of Talia, right? Take it into the direction of Ra's, because Ra's has never really been done really, really well on screen yet, right? I would even argue you could take it in like a Mr. Freeze direction, because we've gotten a very cheesy Arnold Schwarzenegger Mr. Freeze, but we haven't gotten the tragic Mr. Freeze from like the Batman the Animated Series, which I feel like is criminally, hasn't been done and really should be. Like, take us there. Take us to places where the villains that we're going to be seeing are lesser known, lesser well done characters, but really deserve like a good, gritty treatment, for lack of a better term.
A ton of characters that like follow the message in the grand scheme, especially in terms of like what the media talked about cultural movements are, right? So like global warming, you have Poison Ivy. Like her whole shtick is that she was a climatologist of some kind, or a botanist, and then she messed with a rare plant that like gave her power over nature. And like even in the Arkham games, she does a ton of like interesting things that like even Batman is like, well, yeah, you're killing people, or you're ruining people's property, but also like I understand that you really care about the environment. You're just going about it in a completely wrong way. And she's like, well, I am super, so I'm gonna do it whatever way I want. And he's like, well, then I'm gonna arrest you for it. But he wasn't like, oh, you're a terrible person for thinking that. Like, there was a whole dialogue in the Arkham game about it, and he's like, yeah, I get it, but you're just doing it wrong. And like, she didn't change her mind, but that was a whole on the message moment that worked and flowed with the story already, because they were in cahoots for a time. And I think that would be something phenomenal to put into a new Batman that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, like you can believe quite convincingly that Batman would have no problem with her if she was like regrowing sections of the Amazon, or revitalizing a national park that had been destroyed by a forest fire.
Bruce Wayne would pay her to go just take his plane to do that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you could legitimately see that's that anti-hero, like a female villain turned anti-hero turned, I guess, just a wizard. She gets to go out and take care of nature because that's what she's most attuned with, right?
Yeah.
And that would be a fun story trope.
Yeah. Or even, using her plants to potentially, grow rare and exotic herbs that could, produce medicines to heal people. Like, there are that's the tragedy of Poison Ivy, is that she could be doing so much good, but she's just
beaten.
yeah. Another good one would be Killer Croc. If you did a story about Killer Croc being this outsider his whole life and that he never really wanted to be a bad guy, he just got pushed into it because of his looks, you could completely do an amazing on-message, quasi-political movie with that, where, the Bat kind of feels bad for having to bring him down because, he is behaving like a monster, but he's only behaving like a monster because people have pushed him to that. So the question of that movie could become, who really is the monster here?
And that, I feel like that would even set up for an even more interesting Joker. Because when you do bring him in later down the road, you bring in a Joker who's just giving those people a place like that feels like home, right? Just giving them a home. He's accepting them when nobody else would. And that explains why they decide to actually maintain their villainy. Because, like, that is even more on message, right? The jail system doesn't work, right? The prison system is turning more people into more prisoners and just throwing them away. And I think that's just, it all stacks, right? And now we have a human, like a realistic Batman with a realistic villain army, that this is why Batman exists and is necessary. But it all follows on message without constantly having to tell us that there's a message.
Yeah,
I feel like that would be awesome.
I think, I hate to give Suicide Squad any credit, but I think killing off the Joker was actually a smart thing to do. And really, if you're going to have Joker in this series at all, he, at this point, needs to kind of be relegated to, like, the background overall. He can't, at least for a while. I think between Phoenix's performance in the Joker movie and obviously Ledger in The Dark Knight, I think the Joker's been done at this point for the next 10 years. I don't think there's really anything to be explored with that character anymore. And, of course, honorable mention, Mark Hamill's Joker in the animated series and also the Arkham games. It's two separate Jokers played by the same guy. Two very different Jokers, at least from what I've observed studying the Arkham games. I haven't played them yet. I know, heresy. However, I do recognize that, I do feel strongly that it's time to just kind of let the Joker be for a while. I don't think it can be done any differently at this point. Now, I'm open to being surprised, don't get me wrong, but I do agree that doing the Joker in the next movie is not the play. I think the next movie, it should be any of the other villains that you mentioned. Giving Ra's al Ghul a proper treatment, I think, would be good. I mean, I felt his treatment was fine in Batman Begins, but I was expecting to see him show up in Dark Knight. Or even Dark Knight Rises, which he sort of pseudo-did.
Yeah, but they really did tell you dirty in Dark Knight Rises. I mean, we've earned watching Talia and Bruce's romance play out.
Yeah. So, unfortunately for the viewers, we're not going to have any visual aids. YouTube, for whatever reason, gave us another copyright infringement for showing a trailer. Which, if that happens again, we're probably just going to abandon YouTube altogether. Not that I want to, because I know that's an easier platform for a lot of other people who watch this type of content, but it's getting harder to do visuals. Anyway, with that said, however, we will go ahead and continue on. Probably just have to rely on stills like we did when we started this show. We will go ahead and move on to our comparison. In my opinion, I just watched it recently. Dark Knight is still king. And not just king of Batmans, it's still king of capes as well. There has never been a cape movie that has been able to successfully actually... And the metric that I use to judge that is the fact that most people who don't even care for superheroes will still praise The Dark Knight. I have talked to people that are like, yeah, I don't care for that cape shit, but man, that Dark Knight's really good. And it's like, yeah, it is. But it's not good because it's a cape movie. It's good because, yes, it's a great Batman movie. It's a great story. It's just, man, I was getting excited for scenes that I had seen so many times when the movie first came out. I was still quoting lines. I was still like, this movie has aged incredibly well for being over, let's see, we're 2022, so 14 years now. That is amazing, and it's timeless. I didn't feel like any of the things that he was doing was dated. I felt like it was still very much relevant to today, and it's actually even more so to today. The character of the Joker in that film is so, and some people say that, oh, you know, it's not that great because the Joker's plan doesn't make any sense, right? Watching it this time around, and I think maybe the Batman helped to elevate the movie, believe it or not. Watching it this time around, I realized the Joker didn't have a plan. The whole time, the Joker was planning on dying or being in prison. There was, most of the other stuff that he had happen was because he was working directly with the mob, but we don't see that interaction as much because it happens off camera. But when you rewatch the movie, Nolan's writing is so good that the Dark Knight is 2.5 hours of literary bliss, in my opinion, because it's solid. Every angle is covered. The Nolans, when they wrote it, did a great job of making sure that they had everything that they wanted to say clearly without, having to go to the extremes of saying blunt lines like in the Batman. And so, yes, it still holds up for me. It's still the king. But here's where the Batman did better for me. The score. Giacchino definitely beat Hans Zimmer and made a more iconic and memorable Batman soundtrack. While I do feel that the Hans Zimmer soundtrack does a good job to keep the tone of The Dark Knight, let's not kid ourselves here. It's fine, it's passable, but it's also done it, done, and then we have some of the Inception, in there too, which is his style, and it works. Giacchino, I still have the theme in my head. I can reference it right now. It was really well done, and I think that was one of the Batman's strongest points. So it definitely beat it there. The Batmobile I liked more. I felt was actually more practical, slapping a jet engine on a pony car versus the Tumbler. I like the practical functions of the Tumbler, but from a design perspective for full-time use like that, it just doesn't work. It's too big. So it gets a little clunky. It's a little ridiculous. I liked what they were trying to do. Again, Nolan's really good about trying to make Batman plausible. But I think with that, we could have done a bit of a better design on the Batmobile in the long. Go ahead.
Just to comment on that, I feel like Nolan should have just slapped a rocket to a G-Wagon.
Right, or just somebody just lift the animated series Batmobile already. I mean, the Batman felt like the animated series brought to life.
Like I've seen those made somewhere before. Like somebody's remade a real one.
There's actually a dude who lives 50 kilometers or about 25 miles from my place that actually has a Batmobile. He dresses up as Batman and goes to the hospitals in the area, but he drives a legit Batmobile.
I'll drink my water to that. Good for you, man. Thanks for making a difference in the world.
Yeah.
And being so cool.
That's my, but that's, so, yeah, going back to what I was saying, the things that did better. Both Gary Oldman and Jeffrey Wright are Commissioner Gordon. Both of their performances were solid, so I think they're both tied in their respective roles in those movies. They both, but then that's the thing with Commissioner Gordon. That's a character type that's very specific. Batman, you can be a little bit more fluid with. You can take it different directions. I did like Pattinson's Batman, though I will agree, carry on. Bale's was definitely way better dressed. I did, however, find in some elements of Pattinson's performance as Batman to be a little bit better than Bale's for the simple fact that he was more just quiet and stern, but I could still hear him. You know, he was talking very sternly but quietly. Whereas Batman has throat cancer when it's Christian Bale. And so, yeah, I felt that Bale's growling was a little heavy at times, whereas Pattinson's came off that more calculated. Now, they say that the Batman, you know, you guys praise it heavily for the proper detective work. Okay, I will admit that, yes, it does have more focus on the detective work. It does treat Batman as more of an equal on the police force, whereas in The Dark Knight, he's made to be the villain for a very good reason. But he still did detective work in The Dark Knight, too. When he did all the bullet analytics, you know, I felt that both films did a very good job of Detective Batman. However, yes, there was more, because we have a younger Batman for the Batman. There was more emphasis on it. There was more time spent on it, whereas Nolan went with the, you know, it's time for a montage approach. Whereas,
well, I think,
go ahead.
I think that the big difference is that the stuff we saw Batman Christian Bale doing was forensic, like lab type shit. Like he was being in the CSI, right?
CSI lab. Gotham. Yeah.
Yeah, CSI Gotham. Whereas what Robert Pattinson was doing was way more like, oh, there's a riddle. Like he was saying, or he gave us a riddle. Here's the answer, and they're like talking about it like actual like homicide detectives rather than talking about it like crime lab techs.
Very true. And yeah,
I think that's the bigger, like, and that it definitely does matter. Like detectives don't think of themselves as Christian Bale CSI. They think of themselves as that more on the ground, literally looking at evidence in the moment.
Yeah. I do place the Batman very highly up on the charts, though. It is better than The Dark Knight Rises. I mean, that movie was what it was. I don't know. I would say, would I put it above Batman Begins? Probably, because Batman Begins does have that hitch of being an origin story. You know, it's one of those movies. Begins is kind of one of those films where you watch it once, you only really care to watch the second half going for you know, any time you want to watch it. So it didn't do that. It didn't waste time with the origin story. We know Batman's origins. It just dove right into, here's Batman, this is what he's going to do now. And I liked it for that. Better than Batfleck, obviously. Obviously better than... Now, as far as the Michael Keaton Batman goes, I think I do need to give that one another fair shake, now that I'm a bit older, and kind of see where that one stands overall. I don't think it's, you know... Yeah, it definitely gave Dark Knight a run for its money, which I was impressed with. But it didn't quite hit all the marks for me. But Carry On, you came dressed to play today, so why don't you give us your take?
Well, so I will say this: I have, when I rank my Batman, I have a split because I have the top Batman and I have the top Bruce Wayne because they are different. I would argue that, yeah, I think, you know, Robert Pattinson definitely is in contention for the top seat on Batman. But I definitely think that Ben Affleck was by far the superior Bruce Wayne.
I can agree to that.
Know, right? You know, I personally think the Tumbler was far superior, the Bat vehicle overall, personally. I feel like if I was going to be a dude that decided to dress up as a bat and take on crime, yo man, I'm going to want a tank that is street, you know, quasi-street legal. I'm going to want that kind of beefy, scary freaking vehicle as opposed to more of a hot rod look. I want something that people see this thing, and when they see it, they start running in the opposite direction, not realizing that it means they'll only just be arrested tired. That's how I feel about it. I love the Tumbler. My second choice, I think, when it comes to Bat vehicles, is probably the Michael Keaton Batmobile. It was great in its campy, you know, at the time, late 80s, early 90s comic book. That was the Batmobile, and they brought it to life, and it was perfect. Story-wise, I definitely think this is in content. Like, I 100% agree. The Dark Knight is the best Batman overall we've gotten, like, on all points. It is a near perfect movie to me.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to interrupt real quick since we're talking about Batmobiles and I decided to look up the picture because I couldn't remember. Okay, yes, Keaton's Batmobile is still the king. I will have to say that in my opinion because it also did have functionality, but it is also, it's lifted from the comics, but it looks like something that I would drive to the grocery store, if I'm being honest. So...
Dude, you drive that to the grocery store, you are going to get noticed.
Yeah. Well, I used to drive a ZL1 Camaro. Nothing I'm not used to. But,
nice.
I just wanted to say that looking at it. I was like, oh, that's right. That one was very close to the to the animated series version, which, like I said, that's the one I'd like to see on screen at this point. But I think for me, it's just the tumbler was a little too bulky. But I'm going to leave it at that.
Fair. I would say that, it's really hard for me to say that this is... the Batman is in second place. I really feel like it's a tie. I really feel like what we got with the Michael Keaton Batman, the OG Michael Keaton Batman, was in my second place. I feel like this this is just about on par with that. They're just two very different movies, so it's really comparing apples to oranges. You could tell that the Michael Keaton movie was really all about trying to match the film noir Gothic architecture feel of the comic books at that time. Whereas, look, the Batman, Robert Pattinson's Batman, did something no other Batman has ever done, and it made Gotham a character, and that is huge to me. My issue is just some of the other glaring stuff that keeps it from being, certifiably the number 2 slot. I feel like it's a really, really tight tie with the original Batman. And then, in a distant fourth, I think is probably Batman and Robin. That's a pretty fair. Distant fourth. I would also say this, that I think Ben Affleck, if he had better writers, could have been an absolutely amazing Batman. He just had terrible writing for his 2 movies.
Fair. All right, John, what's your opinion on the Batman versus the Dark Knight?
Well, I feel like versus the Dark Knight, I feel like we just got 2 completely different Batmans. The biggest difference is that one of them is not really fully human, whereas the other one is trying to pull out. Like, throughout the whole Dark Knight, we constantly see Bruce Wayne trying to leave, right? Like, to hang the cape up, he's positioning Harvey, trying to help Harvey. So we got this older, more mature Batman dealing with a just crazy threat, whereas Pattinson's Batman was much younger, much more just used to being a brawler, just used to going straight at it head first. He's got like 80% of the information, good enough, I'm going in. And I think that makes for 2 dynamically different movies, especially the roles that were played. So we had the Joker, who's broadcasting terror, whereas we have the Riddler, who's broadcasting individual justice. And I think that the 2 stories really diverge in that instance, where like the Joker isn't claiming to be a just person, he's just threatening the whole city, whereas the Riddler is like painting the world as he sees it. And the worst part is, like, most of the people kind of sort of agree with him. Like, he's not actually wrong when he talks about the commissioners the two people that he killed. He's not actually wrong when he says no, they were dirty. They were on the payroll. They were the reason why drugs are still ruining our city. It's just his execution was, that's not what you're supposed to do. Right? Like, instead of, collecting all this data and actually holding a trial and having people taken to jail, instead he doesn't trust them because the people that he would take him to trial. And I feel like that all plays for a wholly different story, whereas the Dark Knight is very much a story about combating evil with just a little bit under evil. Batman's not afraid to do anything that's abrasive in The Dark Knight. But he's also, like, I feel like there's that whole message so bent on I'll never kill. Like, if that's your one thing, you should probably have like 10 or 15 other fake things so that nobody's like constantly pushing you to that edge of it's kill or let somebody else die. And it just felt a little bit, especially now, watching it now, it felt more forced in comparison. And that's more just in comparison. Whereas like this Batman, or the new Batman, the Batman, it felt like Robert Pattinson's character was getting all these lectures and he gave everybody the exact same face back. Like, I'm thinking about other things that have nothing to do with what you're talking about. And he just kept not changing. And I felt that felt more human. Whereas Bruce is having these really philosophical debates with Alfred and, becoming a better person throughout the entire movie that's only spanning 48 hours to a week. And I feel like that's it's one of the benefits of these like new movies, where writers aren't always going to let the main character change entirely. And that's, I don't know, I don't have a tier system like you guys do. I don't have a 1 to 10. I don't even remember all of the Batman movies. I definitely like Ben Affleck's Batman. I feel like in the director's cuts of both of his movies, he was much better portrayed as a hardened leader. Anytime anybody like rebuffed him, he just he didn't break. He never broke stoicism. Even when he was Bruce Wayne, he was still maintained his stoic nature, and that felt like what the mature Batman that he's supposed to be. Like, the Batman of the Justice League is always this is how we do it right. And then everybody goes, yeah, but there's other ways. And he's like, no, this is the only right way. And it's going to suck, but it's the only way. And then the whole series is about them being like trying all the other ways until they finally go, okay, Batman was right. And now they do it the hard way, but it's the right way. And that's really more what I felt Ben Affleck's character was. But so as far as that's about I would wrap that up.
Yeah, I would say that Ben Affleck's Batman, or any Justice League Batman, look, in the Justice League, Batman is the moral compass in the Justice League, which is amusing given that it is a league that has Superman in it. But no, Batman is actually the moral compass here. And I always find that fascinating.
I love that, though, because Superman never represents himself as the moral compass of the world. The people say he is, but he's just like I really feel like Superman is Batman's humility incarnate. Like, Batman has all of the intellect that Superman has the strength. And Batman has all the money, all the ability to let his pride and ego make him become a dictator, but then there's Superman constantly sitting over his shoulder, acting as like his hubris enforcer, right? And then Superman never wants to be worshipped, because like the way he grew up was that like you do good for good. You don't do it for money, you don't do it for face, you don't ultimately do good for a better plan. You just do good because you can. And that's where his role has always been in the series, is like, where can I do the most good? Batman, tell me where to go. And that's why I think that dynamic works so well.
Well, I mean, when you take a look at, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, right? And you take a look at the original Superman creed of truth, justice, and the American way. Look, Batman is justice, right? You take Wonder Woman is truth.
Yeah.
And Superman is the American way, which is kind of splitting the difference between the two, right? Like that's kind of the interesting dynamic those three have. And even when you just look at Batman and Superman, I mean, you literally have like the sun and the moon, right? You got the rational and the passionate. They're both working to the same ends. They just have dramatically different ways of getting there.
Yeah, and I remember reading on Snyder's original intent for the Superman versus Batman story that was supposed to, create the Justice League. And his whole depiction was the two American approaches to 9/11. He was separating that Superman was this like rah, America support your troops, get the good, like save who you can save, but get it done. And then Batman was the actual troops getting the job done. Like, we have to fight this world to protect this world. And the paradigm he was trying to, I guess, like show was like, what if those two ideals meet at the head of like in battle? And I always get frustrated with people getting mad at kryptonite just being this like goofy rock that can just melt Superman. If it was going to be any rock from Krypton, it would be some version of Kryptonian uranium. So like the reason he's melting is because its isotope is messing with his skin. At like the same way uranium-231 or 235 actually reacts to humans. That's why you can't touch it, right? Like that's what frustrates me, is that like people mess with kryptonite like it's just a green rock, and it's like, yeah, technically, but like if we're gonna say a man can fly, then let's at least say that the agent he's being poisoned by is a radioactive mineral that hurts Kryptonians specifically.
Yeah.
I've never.
Yeah, I mean, definitely lots of good discussion there. Getting in kind of into the Justice League and whatnot, but I mean, it's all Batman. It's all relevant, so it's all. That's
who
good.
Batman becomes.
Well, and yeah, I think when it comes to the Justice League right now, I think we need to get that kind of sorted out to get it on a good level. I know the Snyder Cut came out, and that was a big deal. I still haven't made the time to watch it yet, but
you're cheating yourself, dude.
Yeah, you're missing out. Everything is fixed in the Snyder Cut.
I will definitely get around to it. And I will say this, though, for Batfleck, I did like a more practical Batman in the sense that he wasn't afraid to kill when it was necessary. I think it could have been a little bit better executed overall, but it definitely kind of made more sense. And I used to think that, that was the big fantasy of Nolan's Dark Knight, was that, he never kills anybody. I watched it again, and I realized I was wrong. Batman does break his rule in The Dark Knight. At the very end. He killed Dent. And that never clicked with me, because I always saw it as a circumstantial type of situation where he was just trying to save Gordon's kid. And I realized he did it by shoving him off the edge and killing him. Oh, he did break his rule. So the Joker was right. He did have to go that far. And that's just it. It's that whole idea behind where, yes, heroes only kill when they absolutely have to, but that's the unfortunate side of life, is that you might be presented with a circumstance where you're not going to have a choice. You're not going to have that luxury to stick to your morals. And if you do, it may come at a high cost to yourself. Not necessarily just your own life, but someone you might care about. And that's why Batman did what he did, because he was like, he wasn't going to let Gordon's son or his family suffer the Joker's game. And so he sacrificed his morals to save the life of Gordon's kid. And I think that's a lot of what gets missed in the Justice League and the Batman that we're kind of supposed to get. That's why I agree that, yeah, he's Affleck's Bruce Wayne is definitely really good, and Pattinson's Bruce Wayne was a lot weaker, so I can agree to that. I think it's just the thing about Bale's Batman was that I think he had the best balance between the two. Shifting between them was very seamless for him, and so while I don't much care for the style of dialogue, and I did like Pattinson's softer touch, he did a better job of transitioning, whereas, yes, it felt like when he was Bruce Wayne, he was, emo teenager mode, and we definitely needed some improvement on that. But you're right. When it came to being Bruce Wayne, Ben Affleck he was Bruce Wayne. He was very good at it, very, very straightforward. I even liked in Batman v Superman, there were a lot of elements of that movie I did enjoy, but ultimately, upon rewatches, I was like, yeah, it's not that great in the long run. But I did like the honesty of it, though. And I thought that Jeremy Irons did a great job as Alfred in that series. And so I thought that there was a lot of good elements there that they just didn't make work, unfortunately. So
did you watch the director's cut? Or the...
That would be Justice League. No, I'm talking about...
No, there's two director's cut. Both of them, yeah. Batman v Superman had a director's cut because the whole Martha scene... Okay. Yeah, the Martha scene, that actually got changed. It was Warner Brothers seems to play a lot of games with the, theatrical releases. I read up a lot on it, and, when it comes to... this is why I think you should watch the Snyder Cut and don't think of it as, just looking for the extra 10 minutes. No, it's a whole different movie. The bad guy's different. The reason the bad guy is on Earth is completely different, thought out, actually a complex dialogue. A lot of the story just flows like a story should. The reason it was cut was purely because some corporate level, just wrong. They were wrong, because when the Snyder Cut came out, everybody that watched it, comparing it to the other one, it was the movie that would have made DC actually stand against Marvel. And because it only released on HBO, it missed.
It did crash their servers when it came
True.
out, because so many people were determined to watch it. There's something there. Yeah.
Oh, I legitimately was one of the first to watch. I started it 7 minutes late, and I watched it twice that night. It's a great movie. And it is a different movie. Even the people on Wonder Woman's island, they are just the Amazonians. They are way more thought out, way more explained, and just done way more justice. I feel like there's a lot of, we know what viewers like because we went back and checked the top 10 greatest hits list, and we're gonna just change a few things and we're gonna get it right. And it's no, you literally have no idea what anybody likes because you're not asking anybody. You're not listening to the reviews of your movies, and you're just butchering superheroes, because as soon as the director's cut released for Batman vs Superman as well, it's an extra, I want to say an extra 45 minutes of content that, spliced in the right areas, makes it a whole different narrative. And it's maybe you should just trust your directors.
Yeah, how in the theatrical release of Batman vs Superman, there's a lot of Dante's Divine Comedy references when it comes to Lex Luthor. All of those make sense in the extended edition.
Mm-hmm. everything. Like it's so dumb because the pieces that they cut out were essential. Because that's what's caused the Martha. Wait, what? Who are you saying Martha to? My mom is Martha. And it's like, no, all he was actually saying was my mom. And like there's this whole line where Batman says, "Oh, you're crying out for your mom?" And he's like, "No, save my mom." And then that's when Batman goes, "Oh shit." And that's like an actual like revelation moment, like, "Oh, you really were talking about something earlier before I started attacking you."
He doesn't care about his life at that point. He just cares that he saves his mother. That changes that whole scene in an instant. Like, wow.
Yep.
Well, and Batman has the realization too. It's like it actually takes the time for Batman to be shocked, like, well, because like you know how it starts, like, "Tell me, do you bleed?" And he's like, "Look, Bruce, I need to talk to you about something else that's way more important." And then Batman's like, "I'm gonna beat you to death," and then starts laying into him, right? And that's what starts the fight. And then we have him say, "Well, at least save my mom. Like, I don't care if I die, just save my mom."
All right.
And that's when Bruce realizes he's fighting an actual person.
Good Batman discussion overall.